They didn't flee the square so much as slide through it, Vera guiding, redirecting the path as they navigated its negative spaces. She moved ahead of them with the confidence of someone who knew the alleys like the back of her hand. At one point, they passed through a chapel that had been stripped of its altar and reconsecrated as a counting house. The old sigils were still there, half chiseled, watching them pass. The sounds of boots and shouted orders, the disciplined clatter of the night guard faded almost immediately, the city seemingly swallowing any outside noise. They emerged from one of the thin passageways to a small square courtyard behind a stone building. A single door under a wooden overhang sat in the wall opposite the group. Aside from the door, it was a dead end. A single lantern's light pulled weakly in front of the door, casting long shadows that bent oddly against the wall. Vera stopped and pressed her palm into the wall to her left, into a shallow carving most people would mistake for decorative erosion. The stone shifted, just enough, revealing a narrow tunnel into a dimly lit room. Inside, the air was stale and cool, old incense hanging in the air like a fog. A single table in the center of the room with a wooden chair and parchment strewn about the surface. The walls were covered in supplies, weapons, tools, keys, symbols carved in various materials. A safe house for a monster hunter. Leaning against the far wall, a familiar red-haired woman in black armor with a pained expression on her face. I found her on my way to you and brought her here to wait for you. It is very important that you all hear what I have to say, Vera stated plainly. Juno waved weakly as Vera let the group into the room. Dion saw Juno and his cheeks flushed red. He opened his mouth to say something, but after a brief, careful thought, closed it again. He looked down at the floor instead. Cassian leaned forward, bracing his hands on his knees. His breath came sharp and uneven, the aftershock of adrenaline and the burn in his shoulder refusing to be ignored. Leaf hovered near the rear, eyes darting, jaw tight enough to ache. Dorian stared at his own gauntlet, flexing his fingers like he needed to remind himself they were still his. Jackson wiped blood from his sleeve and let out a breathy laugh that didn't land as humor. So, he said, voice thin, I feel like we've officially crossed a line from complicated evening into actively cursed. No one laughed. Vera turned to face them. The easy sharpness she'd worn in the courtyard was gone now. What replaced it was colder, more honest. As they studied the room, she could tell they had questions. Before anyone could ask, she cut the silence and answered them before anyone could speak up. As I said, I've been here, in the city before, and yes, this is one of my safe rooms, and yes, it is very Morningstar of me. Being a monster hunter in a city of monsters requires a measure of subtlety. They all glanced at each other, then back at Vera. Now, more importantly, that thing, she said. It was Theric. The name settled poorly, like damp earth thrown onto a coffin. Gabriel straightened. He told us. You know him? I know of him, Vera replied. Enough to recognize his fingerprints. I was hoping he'd stayed buried with the rest of Xavier's mess. Cassian lifted his head. Explain. Vera studied him for a beat before speaking, like she was deciding how much truth he could carry without snapping. Theric isn't just a shapeshifter, she said. He's a doppelganger, yes, but not the wandering kind. He's bound, anchored. His existence is tied directly to Xavier's life essence. Jackson frowned. Meaning what exactly? Meaning, Vera said, that when Xavier fell, not all of him did. Pieces remained. Will, intent, obsession. Theric is one of those pieces given flesh. Cassian's voice was tight. So killing him doesn't even matter. Of course it matters, Cassian, Vera replied. It just doesn't end him. As long as Xavier remains unreconciled, unfinished, Theric will crawl back out of whatever hole you throw him into. That explains the confidence, Juno muttered. And the games, Dorian added quietly. Yes, Vera said. He exists to prepare the world for Xavier's return, to destabilize, to test, to enjoy himself while doing it. Jackson grimaced. Fantastic. We've attracted a sadistic immortal with a theater background. Cassian spoke up again. He knew things. Yes, Vera replied without hesitation. Theric doesn't guess. He studies. He finds fractures and applies pressure. That is his art. Her gaze slid, briefly, to Leaf. Leaf noticed, but said nothing. And now? Gabriel asked. Because this isn't coincidence. He's been all over us since Withermarsh. No, Vera said. It's timing. He's only a small piece of a larger plan. She stopped again, turning fully toward them. The blood moon is coming, and the church has been experimenting with blood magic on a scale that goes far beyond ritual circles and mad priests. They've built something. A machine. The word landed hard. A what? Jackson said flatly. A device designed to harvest, to refine, and amplify sacrificial power, Vera said. They intend to activate it during the blood moon. Cassian's stomach twisted. To do what? To resurrect Xavier, or at least attempt it. Juno's grip tightened on her hammer. Why would they do that? Xavier has been anti-church rhetoric since the beginning. Because they believe they can control the outcome this time, Vera replied. Because fear makes men stupid and power makes them arrogant. So they think if they resurrect him, he will play nicely and they can just use his resurrection as a holy sign of retribution and consequence for the public's lack of faith? Gabriel stated conclusively. Exactly, Vera replied, clenching her jaw. And Adrian, where does he stand in all of this? Gabriel said. Vera's expression sharpened. On a fulcrum. He's held Braxia neutral for centuries, balanced between the church and the creatures of the night. But neutrality only works when the scales aren't being tampered with. And they are, Cassian said. Yes, Vera replied, which is why this dinner matters. Adrian will have to choose. We must convince him not to stay absent this time. And if he doesn't, Siberic asked from the back, then the city will tear itself apart. Eventually, Vera replied. There are rumors, she went on, fragments tied to Xavier, objects that should have long been buried. They call them the 7 masks of Malice. Dorian's head lifted. Masks? Vera nodded. Old stories, incomplete records. Each mask is said to embody a particular sin. Wrath, pride, gluttony, envy, etc. Whether they're symbolic or something more, I don't know. But every reference I've found treats them as pieces of Xavier rather than just tools that he wielded. Pieces how? Jackson asked. Anchors, Vera said after a pause. Soul tethers, ways for his influence to persist even in his absence. The church worked very hard to erase mention of them, which tells me they're afraid of what happens if they're acknowledged. So they're hunting them? Gabriel asked. Vera shook her head. I don't think so. I think they're pretending that they don't exist, which usually means someone else already has them. That silence felt heavier. How do we find these masks, or find out more about them? Juno asked. I have not had time to dig deeper into the archives here this trip, but I was planning on going to the library on the far side of the city. See if you can find anything about the masks, their origin, their composition, powers, anything valuable that may help us understand what we are truly dealing with, Vera replied. There is something else, she continued. Oh, more good news then, Jackson quipped dryly. Actually, yes, there is a list that has been redacted of items forged by early men of the great houses, weapons built solely to combat evil in its purest form. Artifacts, Cassian said slowly. Holy weapons. I heard rumors of those items when I was a justiciar. Yes, Vera replied. St. Havel and the great houses believed that if evil returned, it would not do so politely. So they prepared contingencies, arms meant to end things permanently. I think one might be here in Braxia, Juno said, speaking up, or close at least. Vera turned to her. What do you know about these artifacts? Juno hesitated, then spoke. An oracle. She spoke of a relic, the Shield of Dawn. I left word with my contacts in Withermarsh, and before we left, I got something back. Fragmentary, but specific. A location? Vera asked. Possibly, Juno replied. A place called the Withering Tower, outside the city walls. Early church vault. Apparently it's abandoned. Vera's eyes narrowed. That tower predates Adrian's reign in Braxia. So you think it's real? Gabriel asked. I think it's worth investigating, Vera replied, carefully. There is so much at stake now, and the church and Theric will stop at nothing to see Xavier returned. We must hurry, but with the utmost caution. Caution is for the weak, Dion piped up, shaking off his frown. Vera sighed, but didn't respond. She looked up at Cassian. "Are you ready to embrace who you are, cousin?" Cassian met her gaze, but did not answer. She held his stare for a moment and then looked to the group. "The wall behind Juno leads to the street. Stay hidden, and from now on, try not to leave behind bodies and burn down houses. The less attention we have on ourselves, the better." She walked to the wall and pressed a panel in. It slid seamlessly into itself, revealing a narrow hallway leading to a door to the street. She nodded at them, and they slipped inside one by one. Dion, Saberic, and Juno awkwardly turned sideways to shimmy down the tight space that was not designed for walking tree trunks in heavy armor. As they stepped into the cobbled street, the quiet overtook them. Lantern light burned low and blue along the walkways, casting long shadows that clung to the stone like stains. Windows glowed faintly behind heavy curtains, the kind designed to muffle sound rather than block light. Somewhere above them, laughter spilled from a balcony and then faded, unbothered by who might be listening beneath it. They paused beneath an archway that hung over an intersection of alleys, the Silver Wolf still several winding streets away. The adrenaline from the chase and the conversation with Vera had ebbed just enough for the weight of everything to settle in. Juno was the first to speak. "We shouldn't go back yet." Dorian turned to her immediately. "Explain yourself." She rolled her shoulders, a habitual motion meant to release the tension that had nowhere to go. "The Night Guard will tighten patrols after what happened at the court. If we return to the house now, we're walking straight into eyes that are already looking for us. If we're leaving the city at all, this is the best window we're going to get." "And where exactly are you proposing we go?" Jackson asked, paler than normal from stress, but upright through stubborn refusal to appear weak. "The Withering Tower," Juno replied without hesitation. "Tonight." Gabriel frowned, his brow creasing as he considered the implications. "That's outside the walls." "Yes," she said evenly, "which makes it even easier. Fewer people, fewer questions, and if Vera's right, if artifacts forged before the church rotted still exist, we don't have the luxury of waiting around until they fall into our laps." Dorian folded his arms, gazed distant as he ran through contingencies. "We would be breaking into a ruined church vault in the middle of a forest, at night, with injuries we haven't fully recovered from." Saberic nodded, "And whatever is still guarding a place like that didn't forget how to kill just because it's abandoned." Cassian's eyes drifted towards the distant silhouette of the city walls. "Waiting carries its own cost as well," he said quietly. "If the church is preparing something tied to the blood moon, and Theric is already moving openly, then time isn't neutral. It's working against us." Leaf shifted his weight, expression unreadable. "Artifacts don't just make you stronger," he said. "They change the terms of the fight. If Xavier is coming back, and everything we've seen points to that, blades alone won't be enough." No one argued. Jackson exhaled slowly. "So we sneak out of the vampire city at night, break into a haunted church ruin, and fight whatever refuses to stay dead inside. That's the plan." "That's the necessity," Juno corrected. The decision settled among them without ceremony. They avoided the main gates entirely. Instead, they cut through one of Braxia's lesser service passages, where the stone was rougher and the lanterns fewer. The side gate was little more than a reinforced iron seam set into the cliff face, guarded by 2 night guard, whose posture suggested boredom born from confidence rather than carelessness. "That's a problem," Saberic murmured. "Not a permanent one," Dorian replied. He stepped just far enough forward to be seen and lifted his hand casually. The air shimmered, barely perceptible, and from the alley behind the guards came the unmistakable sound of metal scraping stone, followed by a startled curse. One of the guards turned sharply. "Did you hear that?" The second hesitated only a moment before following, armor clanking as they moved to investigate. The group did not rush. They slipped through the gate with practiced quiet, Saberic easing it open just wide enough before sealing it again behind them. The illusion faded as they descended the sloped path beyond the walls, swallowed almost immediately by darkness and foliage. The forest itself was alive. Ancient trees crowded the path, their roots clawing through the stone as if trying to reclaim it. Moonlight filtered down in fractured silver patterns, barely touching the ground. Somewhere deeper within, an owl called once and then fell silent, as though reminded of something it preferred not to acknowledge. They found the Withering Tower before long, Juno's intel seemingly accurate. Rot and mold thickened the air as they grew close, layered with the unmistakable scent of old stone that had learned how to decay. The structure itself crouched in a clearing like something ashamed of what it once was. What had been a chapel now resembled a collapsed hovel of warped beams and broken masonry. The roof had caved in long ago, and moss crept greedily over the remaining walls, swallowing half-erased carvings and weather-worn holy symbols. "This place was abandoned for a reason," Jackson muttered. They stepped inside. The floor sagged beneath their boots. Splintered pews lay half-buried beneath rot, and the altar had collapsed inward, revealing a dark cavity where stone had given way entirely. The stone and wood, slick with green and black moss, made it hard to keep solid footing or make out which parts of the chapel were actually still intact. From below came a sound that set everyone's nerves on edge. Scraping. Slow and directionless. Bone dragging against stone. Steel whispering across rock. Cassian crouched near the altar and pressed his eye to a crack in the warped floorboards. Sickly green light flickered beneath, illuminating shuffling shapes that moved without purpose or awareness. "Corpses," he said quietly. "Monks, by the look of what's left." Juno joined him, jaw tight. "The crypts are directly beneath us, but the stairs are gone." They searched the ruin thoroughly and quickly, but there was no intact descent. Everything that had once led downward had collapsed or rotted into nothing. "So they are trapped below, and we are trapped above." "Ironic," Jackson said with a sarcastic smirk. Seberic stopped near the entrance and tapped his boot against a sagging section of floor. "Foundation's weakest here." Juno followed his gaze. A massive slab of stone lay partially displaced nearby, its weight held at an angle by a root as thick as her thigh. She nodded once. Together, she and Seberic braced themselves, fingers digging into cold, uneven rock, muscles straining as the slab shifted with a low groan, like something reluctantly waking. With a final heave, they tore it free. Juno and Seberic took 2 measured steps forward and hurled it down onto the weakened floor. The impact was catastrophic. Wood and stone gave way in a roar as the floor collapsed inward. Masonry thundered into the crypt below, crushing the shuffling figures beneath it. Green light flared violently and then dimmed, smothered by debris. Dust filled the air. When it cleared, a jagged opening yawned where the altar had once stood. They descended carefully, looking around for something moving in the dark beyond the dim light pouring through the now collapsed ceiling. Bones and tattered cloth poked through the debris, covered in green slime as well, as if they had become part of the structure itself in their decay. The crypt air was cold and oppressive. Alcoves lined the walls, some empty, others still holding broken coffins. Further in, iron gates barred side chambers, and behind them came more scraping and low, mindless groans. 6, Dorian murmured after a moment of listening, clustered near the first door. Jackson cracked his knuckles. "Time to shine. I have a plan. We bottleneck them," he whispered. Dorian nodded and began an incantation. At the doorway, an illusion bloomed, a man standing there, waving cheerfully as though unaware of the danger surrounding him. The groaning intensified. Jackson followed with his own spell, shaping the air just beyond the illusion into a tight, spinning storm of spectral blades. It filled the doorway, covering the entrance to the next room with a flurry. Seberic opened the door. One by one, the corpses shambled forward, green eyes fixed on false life. Each stepped through the illusion and into destruction. Bone shattered, skin tore, rotting cloth disintegrated in a wet storm of violence that splattered the walls and floor. When the last one fell, nothing remained but fragments. Dorian let go of the illusion and Jackson released his focus. The swirl of blaze dissipated with a hiss. "I am a genius," Jackson stated proudly. "It was clearly a team effort," Dorian retorted. Juno and Gabriel looked at each other and rolled their eyes, and the group stepped over the tattered remains of the lifeless monks and into the adjacent room. The chamber opened up into a grand hall with a dozen stone coffins lined neatly in 2 rows, with giant stone pillars holding the ceiling up. The same rot and decay ate at the walls and floor, filling the air with spores and the stench of death. On each side were 3 iron-barred doors that resembled prison cells, with old rusted iron chains and locks holding in something long past from this world. At the far end of the crypt stood a reinforced door, iron-bound and heavy with age, a vault of some sort, with its own sealed room, meant for keeping something out or in, depending on your perspective. "Leaf, it is your turn to shine. See if that door is locked," Dorian suggested. Leaf cautiously approached the door, listening intently for a sign of life or worse. He He tugged gently on the iron handle in the front of the door. It didn't budge. He looked over his shoulder, shook his head at the group, and knelt to work the lock. Midway through popping the first pin in the giant iron lock embedded into the door, Leaf paused. He pressed his ear to the wood, and then pulled it back sharply. "Guys, I think..." The sentence was cut off abruptly. The door exploded outward, wood and iron splintering, the force throwing Leaf backwards in the wreckage. A massive figure burst through. A towering corpse in priestly vestments loomed over them, swollen with rot and fury. Green bile poured from its mouth in searing arcs that burned the stone as it slopped to the ground. His eyes glowed with the same green light that the smaller monks had, possessed by something otherworldly. As the priest lunged forward, Cassian, who was closest, took the full force of the giant body as he was shouldered aside, pain tearing through him from the force as he slammed into a nearby pillar and fell to the ground. The creature stopped and roared, green bile spewing in a stream directly towards the group. Saberic moved instinctively to block it and was thrown back from the weight of the acid, his shield smoking. Jackson ducked behind a pillar and looked over at Gabriel, who had done the same. Gabriel returned his look with a wider stare of horror. Jackson looked down at his chest and arms to see his clothes beginning to melt to his skin as the green acid tore into his body. The pain hit him like a wave as he tore at his cloak. He felt nauseous and dizzy, lost his balance, and then fell to the ground, unconscious. The creature roared again and charged at Saberic. Dorian and Gabriel split, spells flashing as they avoided the bile. Leaf pulled himself out of the broken debris of the door, dazed and confused, just to see the chaos unfolding. He shook off the dizziness and joined the fight, darting behind the giant priest, sliding his daggers behind the creature's knees. Black and green blood poured out of the wounds and the behemoth whirled, grabbing at Leaf, but he was too quick. Saberic forced himself upright and charged despite the pain, knocking into his belly, staggering the thing long enough for Dion to smash into his knee with a sickening crunch. Dorian followed with a crushing blow to the chest from his gauntlet, and Leaf vaulted upward, driving both daggers into the creature's neck. It sat stunned for a moment, forced to one knee, and that was all the time Juno needed. She stepped up and swung her hammer with a righteous fury that the group had not seen before. It collided with the undead monk's face, and it imploded like a withering pumpkin. A mist of green acid hissed and sprayed their surroundings, leaving small divots in the stone and metal. The body collapsed in a heap with a loud, wet thud. They moved quickly after that. Healing hands shook as they worked to stabilize Cassian and Jackson, each of them hovering dangerously close to death. When breathing steadied and consciousness returned, Juno turned towards the room where the priest had exploded from, and saw it. Mounted above a simple pedestal hung a large black shield bearing a red sun crest. "That's it," she said knowingly. "The Shield of Dawn." She stepped forward without thinking. Gabriel moved beside her, more aware of possible danger. Inside, the room was empty aside from the shield hanging on the wall and a small chest that lay on the ground under it. In the far corner, a pile of moss, slime, and rot was accumulating in what could only be the stationary resting place of the recently released priest. They looked at each other briefly and reached up to unhook the shield from the wall. The moment their hands touched it, green light erupted, wrapping around them like living fire. The air crackled, reality folding inward on itself. Cassian shouted their names from outside the room. It was too late. They vanished with a pop. The crypt fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the faint drip of water somewhere below.